Dr. Wolff is here, Dr. Richard Wolff, to talk about the possibility that this moment with the Fed starting to buy corporate bonds is not unlike, it's similar to Jack Kennedy deciding to put a few soldiers in Vietnam. It's going to be hard to pull out, and it's only going to end badly. Check this out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Prof. Wolff with two F's. And Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. It's so nice to have you. I shared with you this morning this article in the Financial Times titled "The Fed's Vietnam Moment" by Robin Wigglesworth, in which Robin is suggesting that by going into a territory, I mean, you're an actual economist. Jerome Powell is a banker. He's not an economist. He's a multimillionaire banker and hedge fund guy. Who's running the Fed, and they're starting now to buy not just corporate bonds, including bonds of banks and big manufacturing companies and things, which are obviously supporting their stock prices, but they're also buying junk bonds. And in this article, Wigglesworth is saying, you know, this is sort of like Jack Kennedy putting some men in Vietnam. It's going to be really hard to pull out. It's going to end badly. I'm wondering your thoughts on that, sir.
Yeah, I think Robin's right on the money. This is being done. Maybe he, didn't think this through. This is being done on the basis of panic. I've been trying to explain to audiences. What you're seeing now is not some kind of cool, calm application of well-trodden paths of policy. Yes, they talk like that, and they dress in their suits and ties, and they're supposed to exude calm. But right beneath that, a millimeter under that surface, is sheer panic. We've never seen a stock market collapse the way it did, that far, that fast. We've never seen the explosion of unemployment that far, that fast, even including the Great Depression. So we are in uncharted, terrifying territory. And literally what you're seeing is that the Federal Reserve is throwing all kinds of money, now measured in the trillions, at everything that it can think of. And because of who these people are, Powell and all the others, that means the biggest corporations get it first, the biggest banks get it first. If there's some to be added to that, well, then they'll go down to the middle ranks, maybe. And you can see that. They started off with just government treasuries, then they started buying the best-rated corporate bonds. Now it's the not-so-best-rated corporate bonds. They are desperate. They will continue. They really do have the attitude that people have going into a primary election. If you don't win the primary, there's no point in worrying about the general election. You won't be in it. So you've got to give your all to the primary, even if it requires you to say and do things that will come back to haunt you later. And these things will. You're creating a situation in which every problem, every sizable corporation faces now, no matter how much it's its own fault, the quickest, simplest, and easiest and cheapest way to solve the problem is to issue bonds, sell them to the Federal Reserve, who are desperate to buy them anyway. The opportunity for chicanery, corruption, misallocation of resources is stupefying. CEO after CEO will get their hands on this virtually free money from the Fed, plow it into the stock market. That's where you'll see the inflation. You've already seen it the last 2 or 3 weeks. And it'll be a casino going up at the same time that the underlying economy is literally going in the opposite direction. Look at it this way, Tom. For the last month, 35 million Americans lost their job. And the stock market did really well for the top 5% of the people who own the bulk of the stocks. A disconnect like that, that's a system spinning out of control.
Yeah. To what extent is the Fed constrained in basically, creating money and loaning it out to big corporations by buying their bonds? My understanding was that they have to take a certain amount of money from the Treasury and use that basically as a reserve or a floor or something, and then they can leverage against that at a particular ratio, and that in two of the bailouts there has been money set aside for the Fed to use this way. My recollection was it was between $400 and $500 billion, and then there was another one that was much smaller, $10, $20 billion, that they could then leverage into 5, 6, 7 trillion or hundreds of billions. Do I have that right? My understanding is very fuzzy. I'm sorry.
You have it right in terms of the formality, but the reality behind the formality is that the limit they have in terms of the amount of money the Treasury has set aside, that's a congressional action. And if the Fed were to go and say, look, $4 trillion isn't enough, it has to be $6 trillion, it would probably take them a matter of minutes to get the votes out of the Congress, and unfortunately from the Democratic side too, to get that amount extended, enlarged, to free them up. In practice, given the political realities, there is no limit. They create money now by literally hitting a key on a keyboard that raises the amount of money in a large bank's account at the Fed by however many billions of dollars the Fed thinks would, quote unquote, help the economic situation of the United States. That's what they sit around and decide. They are not effectively constrained by that little arrangement that you described quite well.
Am I correctly remembering also that the Fed can't directly buy treasuries or corporate bonds? They have to buy them through an intermediate bank, and that bank gets to charge a fee. So if the Fed is buying trillions of dollars worth of bonds, the New York banks are making presumably hundreds of billions of dollars in profits?
I believe the arrangement is that the Fed has to buy through what are called dealer banks. And those are banks that have, because of their size and their history, qualified to be one of the transacting dealers with the Federal Reserve. And yes, the dealers get a fee for what they do, and the banks make their money mostly by first lending money to the U.S. government, the Treasury, and then immediately reselling the bonds they get in exchange, the U.S. Treasury bonds, for a few dollars more per hundred to the Federal Reserve, so it can pump money in by buying those treasuries that the banks had bought literally an hour earlier from the U.S. Treasury. So it's a bit of playing a game, of making there be some routines, because the fear was if you didn't have a few of these formal steps, granted that they're not real, but they're formal steps, then there would be literally nothing to prevent a president like Trump or anybody else from just using the printing press. And there's that scary history, now roughly 5,000 years old, of emperors, kings, monarchs of all kinds printing money so that the population slowly loses faith in the money. The old story of gold coins that were 90% copper because that was the way for the king to fake it. The fear of that, the fear of all the empires that collapsed when they got into this endless money generation by whoever was in authority, that's why we have some of these intermediate steps. But if you ask your question, do they really limit? No, there are steps to go through. They're governed by political procedures. The terror in Washington is now so deep across both political parties that if the Federal Reserve says almost anything that it needs, they are not going to be in a position to say, no, that's a political risk none of them is prepared to take.